Welcome into the first ever Behind the Wall pregame show sponsored by Campus Steaks. It's a Philly thing. Now I want to tell you guys about something that me and Campus Steaks teamed up on. We came out with these Penn State football memorabilia cups. And if you remember back in the day, 90s, early 2000s, they used to do this with your favorite sports star and they'd put them on a cup and you get to be able to collect them. Hasn't been done in a while, so we wanted to bring this back where each home game we are going to feature a Penn State football star, and they're going to have these cups for sale at Campus Steaks at the student bookstore. And then if you are not in State College, you can buy them online at the student bookstore. There will also be signings Sunday mornings following the home games at Campus Steaks from 10 to 11 a.m., where the player featured on the cup will be there signing his cup, signing whatever you guys want, and it's going to be a really good time. So be on the lookout for that type of stuff. Now, getting in today, we are going to be covering an overview of West Virginia, so you guys are ready for those tailgates. You're equipped with all that knowledge. We're going to go over my 3 keys to victory. Then I'm going to bring on Nate Bauer, who's been covering the Penn State Beat for about 20 years, very knowledgeable. And then we're going to flip the script a little bit. I want to bring on Chris Anderson, who has been covering the West Virginia 24/7 Beat for about 12 years now. And he is very knowledgeable, really smart guy. I'm really excited about having him on to give you guys a little bit of drop on West Virginia. Now, before we get into this West Virginia overview, I do want to share a story that was shared with me through Steve Jones, the voice of Penn State. And he told me back in 1982 when Penn State went to West Virginia, and we would play them almost every single year. And we whooped up on them per usual. And Steve had an interview with Joe Paterno after the game. And he said, hey, will you come out back? We're going to do it in the van. This is the 80s. You got to do it in the vans, that type of stuff. So Joe says, sure. So they go, and Steve and Joe are doing the interview in the van. And next thing they know, the West Virginia fans figure out that Joe is in the van out back. And they start rocking the van back and forth. And it's like they're about to tip the van over. So I tell you guys that story. Number one, I thought it was very cool, but also how crazy, how drunk, how loud these fans are going to be this weekend in Morgantown. I'm definitely excited about it, but definitely something to keep an eye on to see how involved these fans are going to be. But now getting into this West Virginia team. They went 9-4 last year. They finished off the year really strong. They won the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and they came into this year with kind of a chip on their shoulder, so to speak. There's been a lot of their players in the media saying some things about Penn State, saying we only, respect Ohio State and Michigan. One of their defensive linemen has been saying that he's been playing the clip over 100 times in the team room. Us scoring with about 6 or 7 seconds left. It was our second or third string offense at the end of the game last year. We scored a touchdown right at the end, and they felt kind of wronged by that. So they say they have a lot of motivation, clearly, and they're telling the media about it. So definitely giving some bulletin board material. But talking about the game last year, going into the fourth quarter, it was a one-score game. It was not that big of a going into it felt like it was close. We really pulled away in the fourth quarter, and Drew Aller in the run game really got going, and the defense really took over. They kind of stopped that run, forced Garrett Green to pass, and the rest was history. But I think this is a solid team. Defensively, they're not very strong, but offense, they have the best rushing attack pretty much in all of college football. But we will get into more of that in a little bit. I want to start out with their defense. Their starting cornerbacks are both out of the transfer portal. One from Northwestern, that's the one that was talking a lot of trash, saying we only respect Michigan and Ohio State, and probably rightfully so. But he was talking some trash. And then the other DB is from Duquesne. I've heard that he is going to be quite a liability. So some opportunity there, although it's going to probably be raining / thunderstorming. There's some opportunity for Drew Aller to take advantage of these DBs again. I mean, we saw it last year. It was kind of his coming out party where he had about 330 yards. He could do something similar in this game, but I don't really know if I necessarily want him to. We'll get to that in a little bit when we talk about the Penn State offense. Now, moving on, I'd say one of their better defensive players was number 1 last year, their middle linebacker. He graduated, he moved on. That linebacking core is really weak for West Virginia. Chris Anderson, the West Virginia specialist, he's going to touch on that in a little bit when I bring him on, but it's not good. And what that means for Penn State is when you have a weak linebacking core, the opposing offense can normally run the ball pretty well. So that is something to keep an eye on with this West Virginia defense. Now, talking about their defensive line, I think they're subpar. They have a couple guys that are all right. That can be a little bit of a difference maker. They have Fatorma Molba at defensive tackle. Many Penn State fans know him. He was here for about 3 or 4 years before transferring to West Virginia. Now, he was on the West Virginia team last year for the game. He wasn't a starter, though. He got to play some. Now he is the starting defensive tackle. That is a big man. He's 330, 340. But I will tell you, I practice against him pretty frequently. That is someone who gets tired very quick. So I might even be thinking, hey, if I'm Andy Kotelnicki, I might hit some hurry-up offense, keep the ground game rolling, and keep these defensive linemen tired. And then these linebacking core that's, like I said, is really weak, keep them on their heels. This is a defensive line that led up 130 yards on the ground to Pitt last year. Pitt was the 122nd ranked rushing offense in college football. That is pretty bad. Pitt was an awful offense, and even Pitt was able to run on this team. Now, I think, last year we didn't rush for a ton of yards. Nick or Katron didn't go over 100, but they didn't need to. Drew had 3 touchdowns and 330 yards. But what I will tell you is they could have. Either of them could have went for 100. They both averaged over 5 yards per carry, Nick and Katron, in week 1 last year against West Virginia. So that is definitely something, and like I said, we'll get into that more, but we need to keep the ball on the ground and take advantage of this really, really weak West Virginia run defense. So, overall, just kind of capping off the defense, they're one of the worst defenses I think we will probably see all year, but it's good because Andy Kotelnicki, it's his first game, getting comfortable, let Drew Aller start to really feel the vibe of this offense, lean on the run game, and get going, and then kind of into Big Ten play, allow that to continue and flow over. Now, moving over to West Virginia's offense, their starting quarterback, Garrett Green, he has a 53% completion rate last year. Now, that is pretty abysmal. Drew Aller had like a 59% completion rate, and even that was thought to be like kind of bad. 53 is really, really bad. Now, where Garrett Green presents to be kind of a mismatch is his run game. He rushed for over 100 yards, I think, in 4 or 5 games last year for West Virginia. And that is someone who can really, really start to hurt you if you let him take off, especially on third downs. That is a guy who can extend drives. If you're dropping 8 guys into coverage and you're only rushing 3 and you give him a running lane, he doesn't see anything open, he's going to take off. Now, this is someone who's not really a refined passer. He's kind of that one read and take off. If his one read is covered in the offense, he's going to then run. So that is something that Penn State needs to be conscious of. And I'd say, Tony Rojas, Abdul Carter's been mentioned that he's going to bounce around. He won't just play defensive end. I would think about maybe spying those guys, especially on third down. Do not let Garrett Green be the game breaker with his legs in this game. Now, continuing talking about their rushing attack, they averaged 228 yards per game last year. That is number 1 of all between Power 5 schools. That is their bread and butter. When we took that away in the fourth quarter last year, that's why we pulled away. They had to really start passing the ball. They couldn't lean on that run game, and we saw what happened. It was 38-17. So I think at the end of the day, that is one of the most important things is we know they're going to try to run the ball. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be wet, and they're going to have home field advantage. Can we get them into situations where we make them pass the ball, make Garrett Green make bad decisions, allow, Zakee Wheatley, KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, you have the best safety group in all of college football. Put them in those 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s, let them make a play and force Garrett Green into something. Now, I want to talk about their offensive line for a second. This is something that was really good last year, and it's going to be pretty good again this year. Right tackle to left tackle. They go 5th year, 5th year, 5th year, 4th year, 4th year. That is a really veteran group up front. Very different compared to our offensive line coming into this game. Now, they did lose Zach Frazier. He got drafted by the Steelers in the 2nd round. He was the best center in college football last year. He's going to be a 12-year starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm a big fan if you can't tell. But that is someone, their run game is going to miss Zach Frazier. He was what made that wide zone pop, and that was the reason they were really able to get explosive in the run game. They're going to miss him a lot. This line is still good, but I don't think this run game is honestly going to be as good because of Zach Frazier heading off to the NFL. Now, one thing, and we'll talk about the defense in a little bit, Penn State defense, that is, but I want to talk about Tom Allen saying we're going to run this 4-2-5 defense this year. Now, I think that's great. Now, what that does is it brings 3 safeties on the field. Now, Zakee Wheatley can play a lot more. And what that does, it takes away one of those linebackers, that Sam linebacker role that Dom DeLuca is in. And I like that because Tom Allen came in and said, hey, we don't have the greatest linebacking depth. We're great with Kobe King and Tony Rojas, and obviously Dom DeLuca is extremely talented. But you say, hey, can I get Zakee Wheatley on the field now? He wasn't on the field as much last year. If you can get those three safeties on the field all at once, all guys that could start at any school, that is big time. Now, where that is a little dangerous is that when you have that third safety on the field, that's what's called nickel defense. So you're taking away the Sam linebacker, you're putting in a safety. It's a little bit of a smaller guy. I mean, think the difference between Zakee Wheatley and Dom DeLuca. There is some serious weight difference between those two guys. So what does that mean? West Virginia is going to run the ball. I would be conscious of running a lot of that 4-2-5 just because Zakee Wheatley's a little bit smaller. I'd think about having Dom DeLuca in there a little bit more to stop that run because that is what West Virginia is going to try to do. So first and second down, I would not be surprised to see a lot of Dom DeLuca and not see that 4-2-5 look and more of that traditional 4-3 defense that Penn State has been running. So now I kind of want to move on to Penn State, and let's talk about our guys. The new tackles. This is, I think, one of the biggest things that's going to go on in the game that no one's really talking about too much. Olu Fashanu and Caden Wallace both went to the NFL, first and third round. That's the first time since 1996 that has happened where both tackles went in the NFL draft. It was Keith Conlon and Andre Johnson. So, I mean, that is pretty significant. We're going to miss those guys. They both only let up 1 sack combined. So Drew Rattler's going to feel a little bit more pressure. So what that means is for Drew Shelton and then Anthony Donka, it's also been said that Anthony Donka and Nolan Rucci are even going to split reps at right tackle, which we'll get into in a second. I'm not that big of a fan of that just because I did it. It's hard to get in a groove as an offensive lineman when you're constantly switching every series with someone else. You don't get a feel for the defensive lineman. But I'm not as worried about them switching off as, the environment in West Virginia. It is loud. Think Iowa 2021. I know it's a bad memory for a lot of fans, but, we had to go silent cadence. I don't think it's going to be that loud, but we had to go silent cadence. It really messed up the offensive line. And now that was a veteran offensive line with Drew Scruggs, Rasheed Walker, all guys that are starting in the NFL now. And we really struggled there. Now enter, Morgantown, West Virginia. It's rocking week 1, and you have a couple guys that really don't have that much starting experience at tackle. They can barely hear, and you're going to drop back to pass and put a lot of pressure on them. I don't know if that's the best idea. So I think Penn State's emphasis should be come out early and often in the run game. Just pound the rock, let those young offensive linemen get comfortable. Because I can tell you, as an offensive lineman, there's really no pressure in the run game. You're like, okay, I'm going to line this dude up and maul him. Now in the pass game, you're thinking, oh man, I do not want to get beat. I do not want to be that guy where I get beat on a swim move and then I turn around and I watch my quarterback get sacked and I got to go pick him up off the ground. Not a good feeling as an offensive lineman at all. So I would say, to ease this young offensive lineman into this season and start to gel, because it's going to take some time for them to gel, let's start out running the ball, Andy Kotelnicki. I think that is the theme of this game. And speaking of running the ball, I came across this stat that I found. Penn State is 9-0 when Katron Allen rushes for 80 or more yards. I thought that was really significant and interesting. I think that tells us one thing. Give these guys the ball. Give Katron and Nick the ball. Get out the way. And then talking about Trey Wallace, he needs to get going. Last year, he had 7 catches for 72 yards against West Virginia in that opener. So he showed the ability to do it. We talked about the West Virginia cornerbacks. They are really weak. So as much as I do want us to keep it on the ground, we got to pass the ball a little bit. I think Trey Wallace could have a similar game where this could be a coming out party for him. I've talked to agents, people around the facility, all types of stuff. They're excited about him. He has a 40-inch vertical. He presents the opportunity to be that guy for Drew Rattler where he can go up and make a play. We've talked about Kyle McCord, J.J. McCarthy, other guys all around college football in the past. They had dudes that could make plays for them. It was really only Tyler Warren making plays for Drew Rattler last year. Now he has Trey Wallace back. Look for Trey to have a pretty good impact on this game. Like I said, let's keep an eye on this weather, though. It's definitely going to rain. But I want to talk about my 3 keys to victory now. Number 1. Run the ball. As I mentioned, Katron Allen, 9-0 when he gets 80 or more yards. Feed him the rock. Nick Singleton, I think he's going to see a much more expanded role in this offense than he saw last year, and I think it's going to be more creative. I think we'll see him, out in the slot. I think we will see him more in the passing game. He was the number 4th leading receiver on the team last year. I could see him being 2nd or 3rd, honestly. That's how dynamic Nick Singleton is. We got to use him that way. I think Andy Kotelnicki will do it. But that's my number 1 key to victory is to run the ball. Number 2 key to victory, don't let Garrett Green beat you with his legs. Like I said, this guy is not good in the pass game. Make him pass the ball to beat you, Penn State. Do not allow him to get out of there on 3rd downs run the ball, extend drives. That's a killer for a defense when you get someone to 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, and then the quarterback takes off for 15, 20 yards. It's demoralizing, and it hurts those defensive linemen especially because they're having to chase him down. So that is my biggest thing. Do not let Garrett Green use his legs. Make him pass the ball to beat you. He is not a great passer. And I have heard, though, that Garrett Green, from Neil Brown and the coaches, they came out and said, hey, from fall camp last year to fall camp this year, he had a 10% completion rate bump. Now, do we fully believe that? I don't know. And is that going to translate on the field? We also don't know that. But I don't think they're all the way lying. I'm sure Garrett Green has improved a little bit as a passer, but he's still not going to be anywhere close to as good as Drew Aller or really anybody else that we see from a standpoint of quarterback play. So I would say, you know, the biggest thing is to make him pass that rock. Now, my third key to victory, do not let the crowd be a factor. Run the ball, take care of the ball, do not turn the ball over, don't give West Virginia any short fields, control the clock, and get up early. Now, you get up early in that first, second quarter, you take the crowd out of it. You take the life out of the stadium, and you do not allow them to be a factor late into the third and fourth quarter where it's a little bit harder, like I said, on a young offense that is just getting going. Let's make this a comfortable game and get out of West Virginia with a dub. I think the easiest way to do that is to control the rock, run the ball, and just allow these guys on offense to feel comfortable and get going for this season. I am now joined by Nate Bauer, who has been covering the Penn State Beat for, let's see, I'm 22 years old. You've been covering it for 20 years. So pretty much since I was in diapers, Nate. So I appreciate you coming on, man. It means a lot. I don't mean to put you out there, but I do it to everybody. When I have someone a little bit older on, I have to, I have to put them out there.
Older? Stop.
And here Nate was just saying he feels like he's still in college before we hopped on. So I mean, I know I'm really throwing him out there.
You're killing me, dude. I got frat bros as neighbors, and they were having parties last night, and I was like, they don't even invite me over. It hurts my feelings.
Oh man, we're gonna have to fix that. We gotta get Nate to a good frat party. But Nate, I'm excited to have you on to talk some West Virginia. The fans are obviously really excited. Game 1. And I want to dive into the offense to start. I think that's where the most question marks lie. And the first thing I want to ask you is, if you had to give a confidence ranking on the offense, 1 to 10, where are you?
So it's a little complicated. I would say 6, but I would qualify it by saying that I wasn't any worse than that last year. And that's what I think is interesting is, there's been incremental signs of improvement, and there are things but this was a team that dominated offensively most of the opponents that they had last year. They just couldn't beat, right? I mean, they just did not do anything really against Ohio State and Michigan. And so, I think that there were some issues, and there was an efficiency and a flow to the offense that just never really clicked last year. And you saw that in guys like Nick Singleton and Katron Allen not really breaking out until later in the season. You saw that in some of Drew Aller and the offense, or the receivers, I should say, not really breaking free for some of the explosive plays that James Franklin thinks are so important. So can I sit here and say with certainty that some of those issues in terms of the explosiveness will be resolved? No, no, I can't. I mean, I think that they have a lot of confidence in Andy Kotelnicki, and for good reason, that he will help put his players in better positions to make those plays. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a lot of the same guys, right? A lot of the same players that I personally don't think Andy Kotelnicki is going to fix or make the play that Nick Singleton almost made 12 times last year, but it just didn't happen, right? I don't think he's going to make first of all, Trey Wallace being healthy changes things dramatically. There's a number of things that are going to be different in terms of just from a health perspective, but those guys, they have to go out and make the play.
Yeah.
Do I think that they have the capability of doing that? Absolutely. But they got to go do it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Like Andy Kotelnicki, he's not a wizard. He doesn't just make people better. Like that's not, he's going to try to get the guys the ball in space more, but he doesn't just magically get to make people open. But kind of going off that, talking about Kotelnicki, what would be a successful day for Andy Kotelnicki walking away from that first game? Like what?
Win.
Walking away. All right. If that's how you feel, I like it. I like that answer.
Seriously. Seriously, that's like, especially in game one, you just got to win the game. And I think like the comparison that came up to me earlier today was Iowa last year, where I think it doesn't really matter how it looks, especially in this type of a moment. You just have to win. And so if it's raining on Saturday, which they're calling for some of that, and you are a little bit limited in some of the things that you could do. Look, if it turns into a game where Penn State breaks open a lead and then they start slinging it around, fine, right? Maybe they put up a bunch of points, but to me, I think success and what will be necessary to win this game is probably 27 to 30 points. And so if as long as Penn State gets to that number, I think everybody's going to be happy and gives them an opportunity to build on that against some ensuing opponents that are going to be less of a problem.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. I think the biggest thing, honestly, is instilling confidence into the offense of saying, "Hey, we can go out there and we can perform against a fairly decent team." Although I think this defense is pretty abysmal for West Virginia. But talking about another piece that kind of has some question marks, I don't think was talked about enough this offseason is the offensive line.
Yep.
Now, Hunter Norzad leaving at center, not as worried about that. Nick Dawkins is a fifth-year guy. He knows the offense like the back of his hand, and he's one of the leaders of this team. But talking about both tackle spots, Drew Shelton was a little shaky in the Peach Bowl. He didn't get any reps in spring ball. He was injured. So I'm a little bit worried there. And then Nolan Rucci and Anthony Donka splitting reps at right tackle. I can tell you firsthand, I'm not a big fan of that. I did that with Hunter Norzad. It's
Yep.
not easy. It's hard to kind of get that rhythm and get into it as an offensive lineman and feel what that guy across from you is really doing. But are you worried about the offensive line at all? Let's say it's like let's say we have to go into like a 2-minute drive. I think there's other worries to talk about, but are you worried about them specifically holding up in pass pro?
Yeah. Well, so that's the interesting thing to me is, and you can educate me more than the other way around, but I thought their pass protection last year was okay, or if not good. I thought the run blocking was what struggled a little bit, but it was also a game of numbers where you're not going to be good as a run blocking unit if you're up against 8 men in the box all the time. So, yeah, do I to me, and this is where Penn State proper the program gets a little queasy, but like to me, the biggest question on the offensive line is health, right? If these guys are healthy, if these guys are 100%, I think that they can be very good, right? Or at least pretty good. Donka has some health things that are right under the surface, and you saw that in the spring. He wasn't able to play in the blue white game. There are guys on this offensive line that if they are at full health, yeah, I don't think that it's that big of a deal. But when you look at Donka Rucci, when you look at Shelton coming off of an injury, like these guys have to be at full go and stay at full go.
Mm.
That right, the consistency from game to game. I think that's where you're going to see them run into problems. Is if some of these guys that have had issues in the past and they linger, what does that do? Right. Because you're talking about 8 guys right now that can possibly play or probably will play, maybe even up to 9. But you can see a situation where that depth gets shallow very quickly if some of these guys aren't able to stay healthy this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I always I find it funny when I have people on. I ask them like O-line questions, and it's kind of like, you know,
Yeah, you tell me. You
it's like
tell
yeah,
me, not the
they're
other way around.
I know, but hey, we're having some good conversation. No, but I love your analysis there. I think that's a great point. And honestly, obviously we don't want anybody to ever get injured, but that's just the reality. A Big Ten offensive line going through an entire season without any injuries, very unlikely. So
Yeah.
definitely got to have some good depth, which I think we have. But keeping those guys healthy is going to be very big. Now moving on to the tight ends. There's been a lot of talk. I think it was kind of assumed it was going to be Khalil Dinkins as that tight end too. But like a
Yep.
lot of that Andrew Rappelier, a lot of people are talking about him. Who do you see emerging as the tight end number 2 for this game against West Virginia?
It's the same deal as if Dinkins is healthy, I think he plays, but I don't think he's healthy. So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard based on some of the parameters that James Franklin doesn't willingly give up injury information, and you understand that. But sometimes when these guys are missing from practice, you get a better sense of what their availability is, and they've acknowledged, right, that Franklin has acknowledged it, and I think that Kotelnicki has acknowledged that Dinkins has missed some time this preseason. And so because of that, when you don't have, injuries matter, guys. Like it's just the reality is
Yeah.
when you don't have the players that you think or would be in line, even if it's your depth piece, it creates an opportunity for Rapplier, and we'll see what he does with it. But it's different from the personnel that you would otherwise maybe expect to be there.
Mm, absolutely. And just to give you guys a stat, shout out my man T Frank for this, but 51% of the time, Penn State runs a 2 tight end set. And then about 6% of the time last year, they ran a 3 tight end set. So Penn State likes to use their tight ends. They're definitely still going to be involved. I wouldn't say they're as good as years past, but that's still a pretty elite group, I'd say, with Tyler Warren leading the charge. The last thing I want to talk about on the offense, we talked about it's kind of being a thunderstorm game. There's going to be some rain, that type of thing. Last year, it was kind of like a Drew Aller coming out party. We kind of thought that was probably his best game, and then we thought we were going to see, Drew Heisman candidate type year after watching that game. Are we going to try to go that route again, where Drew Aller proves himself in this game, or should that not even be a thought? Should we just go ground and pound and feed Nick and Katron?
Yeah, I don't think you should worry about anything other than beating that team. And so I I think that there is, and if you look back and listen to some of the things that James Franklin said last year, and some of the things that Drew said last year about the ability to get into the flow of the game, right? Some access throws that instill confidence and allow him to build momentum. To me, those are the things that I'm going to be looking for. Is there an opportunity? And again, like this is the art, not science, that I don't understand either, but you kind of know it when you see it, of play calling in the course of a game. Can you establish the throw for your quarterback so that you have some easy passes for him to make? And it's going to surprise people, but I think Nick Singleton's going to be very involved in the passing game this year, and those aren't the easy passes, right? Like hitting Nick Singleton on the move out of the backfield, those aren't the easy passes necessarily for a guy like Drew Aller to make. And so okay. Get that collection of receivers that you got. Get Trey Wallace involved early and often, right? Make him the security blanket. Make Tyler Warren early and often involved. And so if you can do those things and help out your quarterback, then I think it opens up some other things that that are good for Penn State, are good for Drew Aller, and will be good for him going through the rest of the season. Because I do think that was a major piece of the storyline last year. Was they just even against bad teams, even against bad defenses, it never looked good. It never truly shined. And so I think
Yeah.
that's something that if you can establish that early, eliminate the notion of there being a blueprint of how to stop you, that will do major things for them going into the rest of the season, because that's really what is important. Is you got to get through this game, and then you get into October, see where things go.
Exactly. I love it. Now, moving on to defense, I want to talk about some depth pieces. Now, the D-line depth, I think, is about as deep as it can get. We return Devon Elise, we return Hakeem Beamon, both coming back for 6 years. We got Zane Durant, we got Smith Vilbert bouncing around DN, D tackle. We're good on the D-line. I can't say the same for the linebackers. Are you worried at all about the lack of linebacker depth? I mean, we have got some elite guys when it goes Kobe King, Tony Rojas, and then Dom. But after that,
yeah, I think it matters. I think it matters more who you're look at on the defensive line. On the defensive line, when you're going through waves of players, like that's okay. You can have 8 defensive linemen who play, and you just are relentless and wear down your opponent. At linebacker, I think it's a little bit of a different story, where Kobe King's going to play a ton. Tony Rojas is going to play a ton. Dom DeLuca, maybe a little bit less than those two guys, but like they're going to be in 2 linebacker sets quite a bit as it is. And then you've got a guy with tons of experience in DeLuca. You got a guy with tons of experience in Elston. I think it's okay. I think where you run into problem, Tamir Robinson is going to play a ton of football this year. So that's 5, which effectively is kind of the 2.5 deep that James Franklin wants to see. If you lose either Tony Rojas or Kobe King it's a problem.
Yeah.
That is a problem. But assuming their health right now, I think that, they're in a pretty good place. They're okay. They're going to be all right there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's definitely the weakest probably point, that depth, that linebacker depth, but hopefully guys can stay healthy and we'll be good. Nate, you got about a minute, which I know is hard for you to finish things in
Yeah, I
1 minute.
can't.
But what is your biggest fear about this West Virginia offense?
Yeah, I don't have a dog in the fight here, but in terms of things that I think that offense could do is a combination of the quarterback being able to extend plays, right? So the defensive line not getting home necessarily, the blitz not getting home, and then the communication in the secondary. I think that they have players in the secondary. I think that certainly the confidence that they have in those safeties is really, really high. But no matter what you do at cornerback, you're breaking in some new starters. And so what's the level of communication there? How are they able to withstand plays that extend for 6, 7 seconds, right? 8 seconds. Like, are you can they withstand that? I don't know. I think we're going to get a good lesson and a good peek into the type of quality that we're talking about this weekend. And maybe it doesn't matter, right? Maybe the defensive line gets to those guys, and you've just got that complementing duo of the edge rushers being effective and the cornerbacks making it difficult for the quarterback to make a decision in the first place.
Absolutely. I love the analysis. Nate Bauer, 20 years on the beat. Thank you for joining us today talking Penn State, West Virginia. All right, we are now joined by Chris Anderson, who has been covering the West Virginia beat for about 15 years here. He runs the 24/7 website for West Virginia. And Chris, thank you for coming on. And dude, this is like a full circle moment. Chris was writing articles about me when I was a West Virginia recruit back in 2019. I just looked it up. I'll have to put it up on the screen. But Chris, we've been, kind of in the same realm for a long time. So thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be on. Obviously, I remember covering you as a recruit, and West Virginia was hard after you. It's funny that I'm sitting here talking to you about 24 hours after Neil Brown and the coaching staff had their press conference for this week, and Neil Brown said something along the lines of, "Yeah, we recognize a lot of these guys at Penn State. We wanted a lot of these guys that are at Penn State. Didn't get a lot of these guys from Penn State, and you were one of them. So, kind of a strange coincidence here."
It definitely is, and I still have a really good coach, Moore offensive line. He is a great guy. Actually, I went back to my high school last year, and Kyle Altuner, obviously, who I think is going to be really good for you guys. He was there, kind of recruiting him a little extra. I think he already committed to you guys, and we had some really good conversations. So I'm a big fan of you guys and what you do over there. Let's get into this game this weekend, man. I'm really excited about it, and I want to start out on the offensive side, and I want to talk about Garrett Green. I want to ask you, how much growth do you think he's had as a passer since we saw him week 1 last year? And I saw Sports Illustrated did an article and kind of said that it was reported his completion rate was up almost 10% from last fall camp to this fall camp. So how has that growth been as you've seen it?
Yeah, so that's what's being reported. That's what the coaches are saying. We've been able to see a handful of practices, and as you probably know, what we're allowed to see is
Mm,
a quarter of what's actually happening. But you have seen some progress there, and a lot of that has to do with footwork. And
mm,
everybody thinks quarterback. They think, especially when they're passing, they think their arm, their shoulders, their release angles, and all that stuff. But so much of it has to do with footwork and being properly balanced, getting your timing down, and that's something that he worked on a lot this offseason. And I'm very interested to see if it translates to the game, because obviously your feet
mm.
speed up once the game starts, once you're getting pressure on you, and when you have that ability to also run, you just start running instead. Um, we'll see if it translates, because yeah, last year I believe Neil Brown's quote was something along the lines of, "Hey, he's going to complete 50% of his passes no matter where we throw it, so we might as well throw it deep." And I don't know if that was a compliment or what, but that was the strategy they took that last year. But they would like to kind of expand that passing game to be, all three levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely hard. Even when you train something all off season, you kind of have to wait and see, is it gonna show up come game time? Because a lot of times you revert back to, those natural instincts that you've built over the years. So I'm really excited to see that. Now, moving on to the offensive line, this is a really veteran bunch. I think they go, like, fourth and fifth years all the way across the board. How much and I want to talk also about Zach Frazier. I think, I'm a diehard Steelers fan, as you can see with the terrible towel. How much do you think they are going to miss Zach Frazier? But then also, how do you think this offensive line is going to, compare to last year? Are they pretty much going to be the same and be one of the best rushing attacks in all of college football?
Yeah, let's start with Frazier because I think it's hard to imagine a West Virginia offensive line right now without Frazier. He's been there. He was a starter for 4 years. Even as a true freshman, he got pushed kind of into I think it was left guard, not right guard. I'm going to go
Mm.
left guard instead of center, then got moved over center his sophomore year. So he has been a starter for 4 years. It's been quite some time since Frazier was not involved. And obviously extremely talented, led the team off the field as well, during off-season work and everything like that. So losing him has to hurt. Like you can't, you're just not going to replace that easily at all. But I don't think West Virginia could be any better position. It's kind of crazy to say, like, hey, you lost a basically all-American center and then an all-conference caliber type in Doug Nestor, who last I checked was with the Minnesota Vikings. They're making cuts this week, so I don't know if he's still going to make it. But there's two guys, two NFL caliber guys that are gone. Yet West Virginia returns 5 guys who started at least 4 games last year, played at least 400 snaps apiece last year. And so I believe the number was something like 3,000 snaps between the 5 guys, which already is the most of anybody that's on West Virginia's schedule. And then they added another player, in Xavier Bosley from Jacksonville State, who started at right tackle there and played 900 snaps. So depth is great for any year, but especially after a year where, again, they lost 2 of their best.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think, do you still see this rushing attack? I saw a stat. I think you guys returned like 96% of your rushing attack. So, I do think Zach Frazier probably was the biggest piece. I've watched the tape. I'm in love with Zach Frazier. I think he's going to start for the Steelers for 12 years. So I'm really excited about him. But, at the same time, that is your guys' bread and butter. I don't think it's going to drop off too much as far as that run game. You were the best running team in Power Five for the most part. Is that still going to be, are you guys trying to put a bigger emphasis, do you think, on passing the ball, or are we still going to see, this is a running team?
Guys, this is a running team.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's going to change. All the coaches are still the same. The mindset's still going to be the same. The personnel is the same. I think it's more just well-rounding that passing part of it, but still the focus is on run. It is going to be
Mm.
run first, run second. Now, last year it was run first, run second, chuck it deep and hope for the best. Now maybe it's run first, run second, and have a more nuanced passing game that could attack deep, could do middle, whatever. Because, yeah, you got Jaheim White, CJ, and Garrett all back, all around 800 yards rushing a piece last year. So it's a potent three-headed monster back there that I don't think they should get away from.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so moving on to the defense, which I know has been a little bit more of a question mark for West Virginia. I want to talk about the two transfer cornerbacks that you guys got from Northwestern and then Duquesne. Would you say this is a big upgrade from the last year? The guys we saw that we played week one, how different do you think they are going to be? And obviously, Drew Aller was probably it probably was his best passing game all year last year. Do you think we're going to see something similar? Are they going to play to that same caliber, or is this a big upgrade for West Virginia?
I think West Virginia hopes so, although not based off what we saw in the Penn State game. The coaches last year was Beanie Bishop and Malachi Ruffin, and Bishop came in as a transfer from Minnesota. Ruffin was a former walk-on converted safety, and he was more than serviceable, and Bishop ended up a consensus All-American. So it's like, hey, take that any day of the week. That Penn State game, they won't take, and I don't think they're going to game plan like that again because the coaching staff admitted immediately after the game and throughout the year, like they went into that thinking West Virginia has to stop the run, and Drew Aller can't beat them. Drew Aller beat them, so they schemed and they game planned to allow Drew Aller to beat them, and Drew Aller took advantage of it. And I don't think they're going to make that mistake again. I think they know that they have to take a more kind of balanced approach to how they scheme that defense for this game.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good point. I don't fault West Virginia honestly for coming in with that game plan. I would
I
do
don't
the
either.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. It's basically a freshman quarterback in his first start. Make him prove it. Now, you come in and you kind of know what to expect. So no, I don't blame you guys at all for kind of going that route. I want to ask you if you were Penn State, what would your ideal offensive game plan be coming into this game from your perspective? What you know about the West Virginia defense? How, would you come in and say, "Hey, I want to run the ball on this defense and what they have," or are we going to go back to last year and try to pass the ball?
I think it's gonna be a lot of motion, a lot of confusion, a lot of, stuff against the secondary. Is
Mm,
the defensive line West Virginia's strength? Maybe. I don't know if it's quite as strong as it was last year, and I know Penn State's gonna have a potent running game, but probably the biggest concern for me looking at this team and looking at that secondary is you have a brand new starter at both cornerbacks. You have a new starter in one of the safety spots. You have another safety move to a different safety spot. So 4 of those 5, and maybe even all 5, because again, Anthony Wilson, another safety, has kind of been in and out of the red and green jerseys, non-contact, no practice throughout fall camp. So is West Virginia gonna be with 5 new guys in the secondary? How's the communication back there? How's that all gonna work? And this was something that West Virginia had tremendous issues with, 2 years ago, got a little better last year, but they had a lot of problems communicating between corners and safeties and who was guarding who and releasing receivers. Like a corner would release a receiver, there'd be no safety there to take him. And they just got beat. They were one of the worst in the country in allowing big plays because of that. So until West Virginia proves otherwise, and especially with all these new pieces in the secondary, I'd be trying to make, again, confusing them with some motion and passing guys off to pull, say, trips, bunch sets to try to make them communicate in the secondary.
yeah. I know Drew Aller obviously had success in that game, but I think, we didn't really run the ball that much and it didn't really feel like we had to that much. But also Nick and Katron, they averaged over 5 yards per carry against West Virginia last year. I do you see you guys putting an emphasis on, and honestly, just kind of knowing what Penn State's going to come into this game. It's going to be on the road. It's going to be loud. You might have to go silent cadence to start. You have 2 young offensive tackles that are going to be starting. You're probably not really going to want to drop back a lot. Are you worried about Nick Singleton and Katron Allen really getting going in this game?
And I think you have to be concerned about that. I mean, that's 2 guys who have had 2 very impressive years, 2 years in a row. So it's not a fluke. It's not a one-year flash in the pan, anything like that with either of them. So they're gonna be, a threat, and weather could play a factor here. I don't know if you check the forecast, but right now it's like 70% chance of thunderstorms all day long. Not exactly ideal for a lot of passing. So even if, you try to take advantage of West Virginia's secondary and Haller tries to recreate the magic of last year, it might end up being a running game for both teams. And it's gonna be tough for West Virginia. I kinda like their first 4, 5 on the defensive line. They're
Mm,
not quite as deep as they were last year when they went 7 or 8. Linebacker, who knows? Um, I've done this bit for my site, and some of the WVU fans don't like it, but again, there's a world where this ends up great. I mean, they have a couple guys who have experience, they have an NFL legacy, but the reality of the situation is the 4 guys that are truly competing for the 2 linebacker spots, one is a redshirt freshman who is coming off a devastating knee injury and has never played a single snap in college. Another is a true sophomore who played 4.5 games, is coming off a devastating knee injury that ended his year early last year. The third is a guy who would never have played last year if not for those 2 injuries I just mentioned, and graded out according to PFF, whatever you think of Pro Football Focus and their scouts, as the worst defensive regular for WVU last year. And then a transfer from Ohio State who didn't play a single snap on defense in 3 years. Those are your 4 linebackers competing for 2 spots. Like, if you wanna be super negative about it, admittedly super negative, but that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate that honest take, and it definitely, sounds like this should be a game where Penn State wants to keep the ball on the ground, especially weather, linebacker, all that type of stuff. And I think this defensive line has an opportunity to get after Drew Aller a little bit, and way more than last year. If we do pass the ball, the offensive line for Penn State is in a much different place than it was last year. But I want to move on to the game as a whole. And we've heard some players kind of come out and chirp a little bit. You guys had a D lineman quarterback say some things. How much of a chip do you think West Virginia has on their shoulder coming into this game? You think they really feel disrespected by kind of what happened last year?
Yeah, I think, defensive lineman Eddie Veed made a comment about that late touchdown from Penn State, said he hoped to, celebrate like they were celebrating. Um, was it Garnett Hollis? He was in
Mm.
Northwestern last year, and he said Penn State didn't. They said didn't respect anybody but Michigan and Ohio State when they
Yeah.
played. Uh, how it is when you're an athlete. You put the chip on your own shoulder to try to push yourself, and I think that's what Hollis is doing there, and Eddie V's a little upset about stuff. But I'm very curious how this sits because this is one of those rivalry games that I think for people of your generation. I mean, I don't even think you were alive the last time these things played.
No,
But not obviously last year, but before that. But for older generations, this was a game that was played every year, but it was really lopsided. Obviously,
mm,
very much in Penn State's favor. So, how much of a rivalry was it? The old saying of familiarity breeds contempt. I think that's part of it. Is that there's a lot of common recruits. A lot of these kids played in high school. A lot of kids see these kids, young men, see each other all the time. And so I think this is a big game. And I think when you get the whole off season to think about it, to talk about it, look at the reviews, listen to what your fans and your friends and your family have to say, it can kind of build like that. So I think if this game were next year in week 5, it wouldn't quite have the same to it. But this is a pretty big one for a lot of people in Morgantown and on this team.
no doubt. Chris, I got like 20 seconds left. What is your one key to victory for West Virginia in this game versus Penn State?
They have to be able to stop the run. Again, the linebacker is my biggest concern. Defensive line, I don't know about the depth. I think they're not going to make the same mistake last year of the poor or the lopsided scheming on defense. So if they can play a balanced defense and stop the run, they have a chance.
Absolutely. Chris Anderson, West Virginia, thank you so much for coming on, man. We appreciate the insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you guys for tuning in to the first pregame Behind the Wall podcast. This is a lot of fun. I had a good time. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys want to hear from here on out. And I will say, when we play a little bit more of those scrub teams, Bowling Green, that type of stuff, we're going to have a little bit more fun doing some fun segments. With West Virginia, I really wanted to cover the nitty gritty because this is a big game. But when we get into some of those bum teams, pretty much, we're going to have some fun and get creative with you guys. So let me know what you want to see the most down below. And I appreciate you guys tuning in. Peace.